welcome. Today I've invited Samantha Bridger to come along and give us a little bit of information about professional indemnity insurance. As mediators, it's a mandatory requirement. Mediators and FDR practitioners that we have professional indemnity insurance unless it's covered by our employment or a statutory program. So it's something we all have, and it's sometimes seen as a little bit of a necessary evil. So I guess what I'm hoping is Samantha can give us a little bit more guidance about why we have to have it and what we should be thinking about. She's an insurance specialist from All Solutions Insurance, and I'll hand over to you now, Sam.
No worries, thank you very much. There's two aspects of professional indemnity insurance, and the first two is basically it's covering your professionals, so your real estate agents, your solicitors, your lawyers and your mediators. And the other part of it is the indemnity, which basically means to put something back the way it was. So the purpose of the professional indemnity insurance is to cover the professionals in case there's an act or omission, and covers them for their legal costs if they're sued. That's the basic premise of what professional indemnity insurance is. Now, I know from speaking to our mediators when I'm doing their insurance that you guys don't give advice, but even without giving that advice, there still is that risk there. And today, what I thought the best way to go about explaining it is to give you guys some claims examples from mediators so you understand what the risk is. So first, I just want to go over what the key areas and risks are for mediators. One of the risks we have is failure to disclose a conflict of interest. And a great example of that was there was a claim in America. A lot of our claims examples do come from America and the UK. We've been lucky enough so far within our history here in Australia that we don't have a mediation claim across the board. But in saying that, we are turning into a bit of an Americanized state. So we are seeing a lot of claims coming through for other industries, and we're expecting the same to happen for mediation. So whilst we are great at the moment, we don't think it's going to stay that way, unfortunately. So, but with conflict of interest, the claim example from the US was there was a mediation between a husband and wife over custody, and the husband had organised the mediator. Now, it wasn't disclosed to the wife that the mediator had actually worked with the husband before in his company. Was for the company that he worked for. He had done some mediation work with some of their clients. So there was a pre-existing relationship between the mediator and the husband. The mediation did go through, and within 2 years, the wife had sued the mediator, saying that the mediator was biased on the husband's behalf, and the claim actually went through to settlement. So there still are the risks there. While no advice was given, you've still got the risk by not disclosing the conflict of interest.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like it's not actually needing to prove the bias. It was proving that there was a conflict of interest that was not disclosed, and so the professional obligation wasn't met. Correct.
You know, that's the thing, that it doesn't have to be advice. That doesn't have to be wrongful admission. It was the fact that they forgot. It was a pure thing. If you actually look over the court documents that are out there on the web, the mediator actually states that he completely forgot that he'd actually done the mediation for the husband's company. It happened 3 years before he did the mediation for the husband and wife. So with all the clients he'd had in between then, he completely forgot. But at the same token, he still had that onus on him that he needed to disclose.
Okay, yeah. No, that's a really, you can see how that could happen. It's not so. Sorry, do you know the case name so that people could look it up?
I can get all that information for you. So for the claim examples that I'm giving you today, I'm happy to give you the case names for.
That's fabulous.
That's not an issue. I can do that.
So can I ask Sam, sorry, Suzanne Pinyon from Adelaide.
Hey, Suzanne.
Are you good? What sort of damages are you looking at in a scenario like that? Like in terms of what was the claim worth? Did it have a practical effect on the outcome?
From memory, there was no financial settlement as part of the mediation. It was purely based on the custody arrangements for the kid. The wife actually sued for financial distress. She claims that she agreed to things. She felt pressured into agreeing to things that weren't actually what she planned on. And she felt that she was coerced into agreeing on a based on the bias.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So from memory, I think that was only about a $50,000 settlement. So it's quite small compared to some of the other claims examples that we have. So,
Okay.
but at the same token too, without the professional indemnity insurance, can you really afford $50,000 out of your employer?
No. I was just curious because I have thought about this in terms of I'm a solicitor, so I'm risk averse and have insurance anyway. So there's no issue for me about needing insurance. It's a no-brainer. You try, and it's great today, this seminar, because it's hard to think of examples and then to think of what they would be worth, because there's no actual financial loss.
No, and that's the thing, like, as you know, being a solicitor, that you can really put any sum you want for emotional. There's no parameters within the courts around how they establish or come up with a figure. So it's really,
and they can be quite harsh with these breaches of either breaches of confidentiality, which I'm sure you're going to get to as well, but conflict where you don't disclose a conflict and you act
exactly.
So
also too, you don't just have the settlement amount, you've also got the defense costs, really. So the cost that you incurred for your solicitor, and all that, which is all included as part of the professional indemnity. Professional indemnity doesn't just cover the payout, it covers the solicitor's costs and all that sort of thing. And it's even there to defend you. So even if you haven't done what is being alleged, it's still there to defend you. It'll go in there to defend you. And they're not always looking for a payout. And I think a lot of people, when they come face to face with a claim or a court case and things like this, they want to settle quite quickly, which is not always how we do it with professional indemnity insurance. Quite often we won't settle quickly if you're in the wrong, and we will go in there to defend your reputation, because at the end of the day, if you're settling early, in a way, it's also an admission of guilt. And we don't want that. The last thing we want is for your reputation to be affected. Well, when you're facing this predicament of you do have a court case, you are being sued, settling isn't always the best and quickest option. So, but,
thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
But with our professional insurance, when you have a claim, we have legal representation that represents you, and they're the ones that review the case and make the call of what they think is the best way to handle this, whether we do look at a settlement or whether we do look at fighting and defending this for you.
Okay. Great, thanks.
It's all right. But you did mention breach of confidentiality, and I do have a claims scenario for you for that one as well. So a lot of our claims are US based. So some of the way they handle the things in the court is not how we handle it here, but it still gives us an example of how it's done. There was a husband and wife going through financial and child mediation, and they were doing, I think you guys call it shuttle mediation, where you do it separately.
Yep, separate rooms. Yeah.
And there was some domestic violence issues as part of this. And the mediator accidentally disclosed where the wife was living at the time, which was hidden from the husband. It wasn't picked up during the mediation. It was a slip of the tongue. No one thought the wiser, and the mediation continued. Nothing was reached, and they ended up deciding that they needed to go to court to finalise everything. 2 weeks later, the husband shows up at the place of residence for the wife and stabs her with a pair of scissors.
Okay.
Now, when he was arrested, he was charged. The wife thankfully did survive and made a full recovery. But during the police investigation and whatnot, it was found out that the husband actually said, he goes, they said, how did you find out where she was? And he goes, the mediator. And so the wife sued the mediator for breach of confidentiality. So she actually sued for $15 million for malpractice, breach of conduct, and emotional distress. There was a settlement that was finalised. That figure wasn't released. I'm not sure what the settlement was, but her defence cost her $200,000 on top of what the settlement was for that one.
Yeah.
So,
goodness. So so a lot of money.
And that's the thing. It's a lot of money for the slip of the tongue. You know, something when you're, especially as a mediator, you're sitting there, you're trying to mediate between two parties. You're trying to make this work as much as possible, and you don't realise the slip of the tongue.
Yeah. So no, that's an example that we all like to think that we wouldn't possibly do that, but it's easy, particularly if someone's digging for that information deliberately.
From memory too, the mediator who was conducting this had been doing it for 10 and had been dealing with domestic violence for quite some time, so they knew how serious it was, and it was a complete accidental slip of the tongue.
No, which could have had serious consequences. That could have had fatal consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing too, like I know when I speak to a lot of your mediators, we talk about a deed of agreement, which is basically a disclosure document that you're getting your clients to sign before you're conducting mediation. And I don't think there's enough relevance as to why this needs to be done.
Yeah.
So there's things that need to be included in this deed of agreement, and one of them is the voluntary participation clause, which basically is you stating that the mediation is voluntary. It's not unless it is court order sort of thing, but the majority of the mediations that we're conducting are voluntary. At any time, the parties can pull out.
Yeah.
There's 2 claims examples that I've got for this, and one claim there was no voluntary participation clause in the deed of agreement that the parties signed. Both parties were going through a financial settlement, and it was a dispute within the family over a property, a deceased estate, and they were slightly pressured by the mediator to the point where the mediation had gone on for a number of hours and all parties were getting quite tired, but the mediator persevered and got them to continue rather than saying, hey, let's stop here, we'll continue at another date and pick up where we left off. They've continued with the mediation. They ended up coming to a settlement agreement on the property, but both parties actually sued later on the mediator. So separately, stating that they both felt pressured and didn't get enough. So they felt that because there was no voluntary participation clause, that they had no choice but to continue the mediation. They didn't realise at any time that they could stop that. And the mediation went well into after midnight, and it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when it finished.
Oh, you're joking.
No.
Yeah. I'm glad that mediator got sued.
But it was quite interesting that I found that both parties sued the mediator, not just one that wasn't happy, both of them weren't happy.
Yeah.
So
that's unreasonable.
In that scenario, you can't check, you know what I mean? But by having that disclosure and saying, hey, I also work here, if you've had any dealings with here, then we may have a bit of a conflict of interest, but if you're happy to continue, then I'm happy to continue. You're covering all bases.
So just catching back on that conflict of interest disclosure, from a point of view of dealing with any possible issues later, I tend to recommend to people that they capture that in writing, like what the disclosure is, and getting people to sign it. So having a
I'd be including the conflict of interest in your
in your agreement to mediate, but also have a pro forma so you can specify.
The conflict of interest, voluntary clause, they're the 2 main things. And that you're not there to give advice. Those 3 things.
And the confidentiality,
And the confidentiality. They need to be included in the deed. Without that in the deed is worthless.
I had a case where someone did have a conflict of interest. Their agreement to mediate just had a universal waiver of any problem with a conflict of interest. I didn't find that was appropriate when the complaint came in, because you've got to specify what it is and actually have the people saying, yes, I'm aware of this and we've both decided to proceed. Yeah, good.
That's correct. The waiver is not going to stand up in court. You need to basically outline these are the conflict of interest and,
potential. There's some things that
I have, I'd be looking at a tick box. Yes, we've discussed the conflict of interest. Yes, I'm aware of the risks and concerns. And yes, I agree to continue with mediation.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thanks. Yep.
Suzanne, if I can ask you a question. When you say that you've got to give the feedback to the court, how do you go about making sure that you're not breaching your confidentiality at the same time?
Oh, no, we don't give feedback about the content of the mediation, just that they've bona fide participated, that they made an effort to resolve it. So it's just ticking a box basically to say that because I have had one occasion where one of the parties just refused to really be reasonable at all. No negotiate, like they just wouldn't. But having said that, they started off like that, but it actually, so it's for those really severe cases where a party just doesn't.
Yeah, sits there, arms crossed, my lawyer said doesn't. Yeah, I'm here.
And we don't normally have all day, by the way. We've got 2 hours set aside, maybe 3. But yeah, so no, I don't divulge. The only thing that's held on the court file is if an agreement is reached, we do the heads of agreement and they know that's being given to the court, but it's not on the public.
Yeah,
like the judge sees it, but it's not.
Yeah,
still within the confidentiality realms.
Yeah. So they understand at the start that it's a bit like if you had an employer and then in an employment situation that the boss is going to get told.
Exactly. Yep.
It's just about transparency, isn't it? Really, which we're very familiar with in the law as well.
Yeah. So treat it like a checklist that you're ticking off absolutely everything on that deed of agreement. And I wouldn't even be going to the client, here, have a read of this and then sign it. You need to have that discussion with them as well. Like, you can't just rely on them reading it. You need to actually explain to them what it means, because the other thing too is we're a multicultural country too. You're going to have clients that English is not their first language, and reading this deed of agreement, they're not going to understand what it means and what the effects are, and you need to explain it to them in the best way possible. Yeah. So, and it's always best to have that discussion. So what other ones have I got? So, what did you have a question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just noticed someone was putting a question about how much professional indemnity, but are you going to deal with that stuff a bit later on? Or?
There are a couple of different policies out there in the market. So our recommendation and what we have discussed with our professional indemnity underwriters, who have also had the chats with our legal team, is that we feel that the 1 million is sufficient for you guys. So 1 million cover, which is basically a policy that covers you for all your needs. With the claims that we're having outside of the mediation industry, we're not seeing your $20 million claims or your $15 million claims like we do in the US. We're a lot more considerate and reasonable within our courts here. So at the present time, it could change, but at the present time, the 1 million is sufficient for you guys. There are policies out there which they refer to as group policies or group limits. For example, you might have 100 members on the policy sharing a limit. So for example, if you had 100 people on a group policy with a $20 million limit, if 20 claims are made, the 21st claims, there's no cover available because the limit's already been used. And that's one thing to consider. So most of the group policies are industry specific. So it will be just for mediators or just for real estate agents. But you do have that risk there that you don't know how many other members are part of this policy. You don't know how many other members have put in claims on this policy and what the leftover limit is. So 6 months into that policy, that limit could already be exhausted, which means if you have a potential claim, there is no cover there available for you. And it's a really concerning thing. Our company and the brokers that we deal with, we don't like group policies. We don't touch group policies. We avoid them like the plague because there is that concern and that risk there that you don't know how many claims are in and whether there's a cover left over at the end of the day.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions about that? It is a type of policy that some people in our industry offer. It's definitely not anything that we recommend either.
And that's why we've always done the individual policies for all the mediators, which have their own limits and no one else can claim on it but them.
That's good. That answered the question. And yeah, look, occasionally you might have a contract or something that requires a higher limit just because the person that's written the tender has, arbitrarily picked a number out. If that's the case, then I suppose, Sam, you can write a policy for a higher amount than you think people need.
I do know we have some of the FDR guys who are working with a specific mob. They're required to have 2 million cover with a 4 million aggregate, and we do special policies for them as well. So we can always do the higher limit if it's needed. That's not an issue. We do have some members that require, for the industries that they're working in and doing the mediation, they're required to have a higher cover, and that's something we can always come to the party, and we will always tweak and fiddle with the costing for it as well. Like, I know we offer set pricing for the mediators, but even if they require a high limit, we can still do set pricing for that as well.
Okay, no, that's cool, because sometimes that's a concern, because people think, well, if I'm asked to do that in the contract, well, don't I, isn't that what I should have? But
the other thing we can look at doing as well is, if you're, for example, you're a mediator but you're a counsellor as well, we can look at doing a combined policy. We can't offer the mediation price because that is specifically just for mediation, but if there are other aspects that you're working in that you do need that cover, we can look to extend our policy to cover you for those things as well. But you need to keep in mind that unless you've advised us, there is no cover for those extra occupations. So when you're filling out your proposal forms, if you're a counsellor and a mediator, but you just list mediation, there's no cover for the counselling. We can only cover the occupations that you've advised us of.
Yeah, okay, that's a really important point. Does anyone have any follow-up questions about that? Because I know a lot of mediators might do some consulting. If you're a workplace mediator, maybe do a bit of consulting or a little bit of training or something like that. Have we got anyone here that's got that, those sorts of questions? Or no? That all makes sense? Excellent. Yeah, I suppose the principle is just disclose.
Yeah, exactly. The more information that you can give me, the better we can help you out.
Yeah. So what happens if someone discloses, I'm doing this and that, and you say, okay, well, that part's a high risk, it's going to cost X amount, and they say, oh, I don't want to pay that much. Can you still cover them, just for the risks that it's identified?
We definitely can. We do have a couple of mediators who have come up to that scenario where I've said to them that they've gone, we want cover for this. We've provided them with the quotations. They've gone, you know what, it's too expensive. I don't feel like I have a risk, or they want to self-insure for that risk and not have the cover in place. We would put it back to the mediation price. We'd cover them for the mediation. But what we would normally do is we would exclude the occupations that they're not wanting the cover for.
Okay.
So, and that's really us covering ourselves to sort of say, hey, we've given you a quote, for example, for counselling. You say you don't have a risk and you don't want cover for that, but we're just going to note it down on here that you're definitely not covered to cover our bums.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah. So it's a common thing. We've got no issues doing that. And I know too, for a lot of your guys, they're just starting out. No, they're really price conscious. And some of the type of thing, like, for example, counselling, you're looking at a premium of $750 plus charges, so GST and stamp duty on top of that. And for some of the guys, it's too expensive. Start out. The other thing to consider too is that we can fiddle and tweak the policy as much as we like throughout the year. Nothing's set in stone. We can make changes whenever you need. So if you decide that you don't want to have cover for the counselling, but in 6 months' time you go, hey, I'm actually going to start doing the counselling now and I want the cover, we can update the policy, we can add it back on, we can play around with it as much as we need. Same as if you're going to be working with a company on a contract for mediation and they require you to have a higher limit, we can adjust the policy midterm. Nothing is set in stone, and I'm only a phone call away.
No, that's very true and useful. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fabulous. Thank you. I think because that's often something that worries people. They think, oh, if I say, then
and that's the thing. Like, if you think there's a risk, if you're not sure, give me a call. We can have a chat about it. We don't have to make a change. We can just have that conversation to discuss. What are your concerns? What do you need? What can we do to help you?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Excellent. So do you have any other examples?
I do. So one of the examples, and a lot of your mediators would know when they're filling out our forms, that one of the questions that we ask is, do you give legal? Because that's a completely different ball game and a completely different type of insurance coverage that they would need if that's the case. But whilst you're not giving legal advice as a mediator, you can still, in some certain circumstances, accidentally give advice. And one of this was, there was a mediation between a husband and wife over children and financial settlement. And after the meeting, there was ongoing mediation sessions. So it wasn't resolved instance, and they were booked in to go back again. And the husband actually stayed back afterwards and spoke to the mediator and mentioned that he had been threatened by the wife, and she'd been quite physically and verbally abusive. And the mediator suggested that they contact the police and look at an AVO. The husband did and went down the path of there. Turns out it was the other way around. And it was more the wife that was receiving the abuse. And the husband had stated when he under the application for the AVO that the mediator had advised him he needs to apply for the AVO. So when he approached the police and they dealt with it in the past, the police looked at this and gone, well, the mediator said it, there's got to be concerns there. And they went down the path. And the husband then put the AVO application all over social media. So the friends and the family all found out about it, and the wife sued for defamation. So, and she sued the mediator because the mediator had given the advice. Funnily enough, when that actually went to court, the judge did not rule it that the mediator gave advice. So they stated that it was done within the scope of mediation. So the insurer at that time went in to defend the client. They didn't settle, they didn't do settlement like some people think that they need to do. And they went in there to defend the mediators. That turned out to be about $100,000 in defence costs, but it worked out in the mediators' favour, and they didn't have their name tarnished. They were able to continue as they were. So.
Yeah, no, because you do have to respond to a disclosure, not second guess, and it's exactly.
So and it was twisted. So
yeah, absolutely, because it's up to the family violence court to determine whether that's something that should warrant an order. And okay, no, that's interesting. So that's a really good example of a defence.
And what actually helped the mediator at the time too is that the mediator had noted it down during their discussion on their notes from their minutes from the meeting. So it was their own personal notes that weren't distributed to the husband and wife, but they had noted down that the husband had declared this as a form of abuse, and I had suggested that he should speak to the police. So, and that came in, and it was her notes that saved her in a way, by basically saying, she confirmed what he told her and exactly what that she had, not that he should get an AVO, that he should speak to the police. So if he had concerns.
And saying one of the options is an IVO, that's still appropriate, and the legal information we should be providing.
Exactly. So and that's the thing, the more notes that you make and the more you back yourself up with what is discussed during your mediations, the better safe practice that you have for yourself.
So using an intake form when you're doing your intake, so that you've got the evidence that you have risk screened, and when sometimes we have to do a mandatory report, so definitely making a report on that, because that can be misused as well, disclosures.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, but the last claim example I have is, I saved the best for last, which is basically, it talks about defamation. Now, one thing that is included in a lot of professional indemnity policies is spousal cover, which covers husbands and wives of the person that's insured for the professional indemnity. So in this case, it would cover the mediator's husband or wife. So this scenario, there was a mediation that was taking place between a husband and wife. And during the mediation, the wife had mentioned that the husband had a bit of a small wound and mocked him in a way during the mediation. The mediator handled it superbly, moved them off track, and back on track to what they should be discussing. But that night the mediator went home, was having a bit of chuckle, and told his wife about it. Move forward a couple of months later, the wife of the mediator was at a function and actually bumped into the husband with the small member. And during the discussion, they were standing around with a group of people, and he mentions his name, and she goes, "Oh, you're the guy with the small member." And the gentleman was horrified and actually sued both the mediator and the mediator's wife for defamation, because he knew that the wife wouldn't know without the mediator telling him what had happened during that mediation session. That claim, last I checked, is still ongoing. We don't have a settlement amount on that, but the mediator was lucky in the fact that because they had the spousal cover as part of their policy, the fact that the gentleman sued both the mediator and his wife, they were both covered under the mediator's policy. So the insurance will cover both parties, even though they're sued separately.
Okay, no, that's very fortunate in that case. If it's still ongoing, it's even just the legal costs are going to be significant.
Oh, very much so. So
Yes.
because that's the thing, it was said in a public place. There were other people with as part of the conversation. They then go and tell others. It gets back, and next thing you know, everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, that's massive. So yes, think about and look, we shouldn't be identifying people when we go and debrief with our partner or our supervision group or whatever. You know, it's
the mediation is confidential, and that's the way it should stay. It should stay between the parties and the mediator. It shouldn't be going back to other parties.
Yeah.
So just on that, Joanne, you do often debrief or even talk to other mediators about a scenario because it might have been particularly difficult, or you might be, you know, rehashing what you did and whether you could have handled it better, or you know, whatever.
Absolutely.
And I mean and it's similar to the law in the sense that you don't identify people. You're more talking about the principles as a whole, or the process and the tactics you would use, or you could use in a particular type of scenario, and that happens a fair bit. So is your advice really just to avoid too much information that would maybe identify a party, even if inadvertently? That was a fairly extreme example, surely, that one.
There's a penalty for a stupid wife, really, in that situation as well.
I have a feeling that they might be in mediation now.
Yes, you know, that's a bit of a slip.
Yeah, but particularly if you're in a regional area or somewhere where there's
everyone knows everyone.
It's something that you have to be very mindful of.
Although, Joanne, even in cities, it's a very small world, and I'm constantly amazed at the coincidence when, anyway.
Even identifying someone's occupation may disclose who they are or the type of business they're in. If it's from a human nature point of view, if it's someone who's high profile, it can be quite tempting from the point of view of a mediator to think, oh, I should have mediation with them. You must not, cannot, don't.
No.
But I think too, in saying that, you still do need to be able to have those debriefs with other mediators. That shouldn't be stopped.
No,
that's something that's needed, because that's how you grow and you learn and you develop. It's just, you need to be cautious with how you're disclosing the information and what you're disclosing, and then not being able to identify the person is the main thing. For example, if they worked in a certain industry, change the industry when you're talking to someone about it.
Okay.
You know, a simple thing like that. If it's a footballer, they're now an accountant. So, you know, just the little things, if you can change and tweak it so that you're helping to avoid identifying your client.
That's great advice.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, excellent. And look, just wanted to loop back around that legal advice, that distinction between legal advice and legal information, because like, many mediators are still practicing lawyers, and so there's a real challenge there. Have you got any? Can you tell us, Sam, about that?
So it's a very fine. It all depends on what hat you're wearing at the time. So if you're wearing the mediation hat and you have something that, you know, the client is requiring legal advice, you can't have it in that. But you can always say to the client going, hey, I can't give you legal advice. However, if we book an appointment and I can wear my lawyer hat, then by all means we can have that discussion down track. But right now I can't have that discussion with you. I can give you the legal legislation. I can go through the law.
You'd be conflicted out from giving them advice because you've been involved in the mediation.
Depends on what type of mediation work you're doing.
Sure. Okay.
So
it depends if it's a different if what they're mediating about is different to what they want legal advice about. So say they're so impressed by your mediation skills, they say, oh, Suzanne, I've got another issue that's completely separate from this. Can I come and see you about that? Okay. All right.
By all means.
But there are different.
But if they want the legal advice based on the mediation that you're discussing with them,
no,
you can't. You can't. The only thing you can say is that I suggest you seek legal advice for that. But I can't give it to you. Even if you wear both hats normally, you need to go with whatever hat you've walked in that door with is the hat that stays through that whole meeting.
Yeah.
So if, you know, and the same as you know, Suzanne, if you're seeing a client for a legal matter, you then can't be their mediator.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. And look, if you are a lawyer mediator, have a look at your agreement to mediate, your deed, and be really clear there, really clear on whether you can provide you might be able to provide general legal advice that doesn't give specific guidance to the people. So you might be, as a lawyer mediator, under the ethics, you're allowed to go a little bit further than a non-lawyer mediator, but you can't give individual advice that you can't give.
If you're just giving them general guidance as to how the legal system works, particularly in the court process,
or a general range, perhaps.
Fine.
To go to that extent.
Yeah.
But which you shouldn't, if you're not a lawyer, you shouldn't be saying that, you know, on your situation, the range would normally be this. That's really overstepping your...
And that information you're giving, even as a lawyer, is for the benefit of both parties, not one, because of course you can't be seen to be favouring one party, because then you're breaking another rule.
Absolutely. And
can't be biased.
My whole thing is just avoid it, send them off to separate. That's going to be your safest.
I think so. I make very sure when I'm doing the mediations that I do not have my lawyer hat on.
No.
At all. Inside, I'm sometimes thinking, you are fighting over this amount of money, seriously. Don't give advice at all.
That's by far the wisest,
safest.
But if you want to skate on thin ice, think about putting a real definition, and never. You can't give independent advice if you're working with both parties.
And that's the thing.
In your agreement, you can't do it.
The professional indemnity insurance will kick in if you accidentally give advice. You know, that's what it's there for. If you accidentally give legal advice, that's a grey area. It's a real grey area, and it also depends on, because you're intentionally giving the advice, the legal advice, and it's a grey area, and it depends on the actual individual scenarios to whether you would be covered.
No, that's a really important point too.
Well, it would only matter if it was detrimental to one of the parties, wouldn't it?
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, they have to show they've suffered some damage because of something that you've done, which you perhaps shouldn't have done.
They claim that they've accepted an offer that wasn't very good based on your legal advice. That possibly they'll be able to at least have something that you might have to defend. Industry, I think part of the reason there aren't that many claims is that we do have a complaint handling process. So the first point of redress is to go to the professional body that the mediator has, and most of the complaints are dealt with at that level, and so it doesn't actually go into the litigative model, which I'm not sure how robust the complaint handling first line is in the US, but it's quite robust.
I actually don't think they have one.
And so something that could be dealt with perhaps less litigiously.
Through all my investigation into the claims that they've had over in the US and the UK, I have not come across a system like the way we do here. So it's good in that regard, and I've certainly had cases there where I know there would have been very good grounds for legal action if it wasn't that the person was satisfied with the redress at that level. So look, that's excellent. I'm aware of time, so there's some really good insights here. I think for us, from me, just as a bit of a recap, is, you know, talk to the insurance company about the risks involved, and make sure your cover is covered. I'm only a phone call away. If you've got any questions, give me a call.
Absolutely. And it's not just bad people that can have problems here. It can be something that any of us could come across. And writing notes, Barbara's asked, with regards to writing notes, is there a guideline as to how long to keep them?
I have a question on notes as well, just as an addendum, because I'm very conflicted about note keeping, because I thought part of our protection of confidentiality within a mediation was not to write or not to keep our notes. So when you said, oh, that the mediator was saved by the notes that they kept saying, could you perhaps, Jo and Sam, clarify the note question that Barbara and I have? That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, Sam, do you want to address it from a legal perspective? I'll address them.
Is to stick with the financial requirements and go with the 7 years. I know as a insurance broker, we're required legally to keep our notes for 7 years. And usually, if there's going to be a claim, it's usually going to happen within the first. And, you know, I personally am a little bit of a hoarder with my notes, and I just keep them permanently. I don't actually for 7 years.
So our training as mediators, and even a lot of the agreements, say that we keep a copy of the agreement which they sign, but are you suggesting we keep all of the notes that we take during a mediation?
What I would say is that we should keep our intake form. So we should keep our, that form. And if there's an issue that's arisen in the mediation, so for example, if we refer someone off to the police or to somewhere else, you should have a note about keep a file note, and if you make a mandatory report, or if there's some sort of an incident or whatever,
something a bit unusual.
So look,
at the end of the day, follow your gut.
So if something unusual happens, make a file note about it. After the mediation you're concerned about. Your intake is about, have you screened for risk? Have you put people in a situation where you ethically should not have created it? So if there is a power imbalance that you've assessed but decided to proceed, you want to have a record of that. You should be keeping the agreement to mediate so that you've got evidence of what's been disclosed. Definitely if there was a conflict of interest. So the obligations with a mediator isn't we must protect. There's no regulation. The standards are silent about how long we have to keep records. So the 7 years is looking to other industries, and likelihood that after 7 years there's unlikely someone's going to suddenly pop up and say, oh, I think you were a bit biased in that mediation seven years ago.
So do we need to be very specific then as to what we're keeping and transparent about that? Because with all the training I did, it was all, we're not taking notes, we're not keeping notes. And
okay. So I think we might need to refresh that, and I'm doing a webinar tomorrow on complaint handling, so I'll refresh that again and have a look. But yes, we should, like, the agreement to mediate, and if you shouldn't be throwing that away after the mediation.
No, certainly not the agreement, and certainly not. I tend to keep a copy of the heads of agreement, like particularly with the court ones, what they've agreed to. But I usually don't keep
the scribbled notes. Normally, a mediator wouldn't keep all of them.
Unless there's an issue, like you said.
You make a formal file note, like you make the dot points. This is what happened. So it's covering us.
You need to look at the notes and really keep what you feel protects you. So if there are things that it's completely irrelevant and it is not a concern, you can remove them from the notes. But you need to look at your notes as a way to protect yourself. So if in the event that down track I am sued for this case, what do I have in my notes that I have there to protect me?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are sued, you can't just then dispose of some of your notes. You can't decide, I'm going to prune the file now. No. So have a process that you do when you close a file. Okay, and maybe we need to do another PD on that, on closing the file. What do you keep? What do you summarise? And, how you need to... I had a complaint and the mediator was saying, oh, I've got a file note here somewhere. Oh, the kids get in the office, they scribble on things. Oh, no, you must keep your files securely. If you password protected, if it's electronic, in a locked filing cabinet, if it's paper. This is being a lawyer, I keep paper. Trust me, I love keeping notes. I know. It's drilled into us, but the training in mediation was always not to, particularly private session, you don't even take notes, but it would be good to get a little bit more guidance on absolutely.
On that.
So you're not doing the file notes the way a lawyer would. Like you shouldn't be finishing a mediation with 10 pages of notes. No, that's just not the requirement. Just dot points and just really looking at what could be. And the other thing, clients come back. Like I had a client call today, the mediation was 2019. and I've got a recap pre-mediation with her on Thursday. So if I didn't have any file,
that's right.
You know,
you wouldn't remember. You wouldn't necessarily remember.
I wouldn't remember. Yeah. I wouldn't know where she's at. I won't be able to just work with her on what's changed. I'd have to just start from nothing, which is not providing a good service.
Right.
You know, and it also makes that conflict check difficult as well. It's not necessarily like with that first scenario, it might not have come up because the mediator may never have actually had any contact with the owner of the business, which we may not, but if you've got your files there, you may also have been able to do it. So look, that's a really good topic that's come up, and I think it's probably something we need to go and have a look into a little bit more detail, because us treating everything, okay, that's finished, great session, bye, straight through the shredder. That's really not not
the other thing
professional.
Like I'm a shocking scribbler. During meetings with my clients and phone calls with my clients, I'm scribbling bits of paper. And I actually also have a habit where I will scan my scribble paper and store it.
Yeah.
So I keep copies of all my scribble papers. So that if down track I need to refer to them, I don't have to worry about going through all the paper. I've got the electronic copy. So you don't always have to keep the paper copy too. I know, Suzanne, you like your paper. But
I will confess to liking paper. Yes, I'm trying to reduce. I'm trying to reduce it, but
we can see behind you. Yes.
Oh yes. Can't see any client names.
Yeah, and look, I guess the thing is, get your process, but think about, if there was in 3 years or in a period of time, what do I know about that case? So it may be just scanning things. It may be as part of your reflective practice, you do a little summary, which is what you save in the next day once you, or whatever. But just have a process to keep track. And definitely, if you need to, if like in that case, you're referring someone off to the police, or you're making a mandatory report, or you have a file note, that's what you've done.
I'm assuming their time limit for taking a claim would be the limitation for professional claims. 6 years. It varies from state to state. I think it's 6 years in South Australia to sue your lawyer or sue your. So we would come under that. We would come under the professional.
As far as I'm aware, some states are 6, most are 7. I think there is one state that's 5 from memory. That's why I say if you follow the financial guidance, whereas the finance industry are required to keep it for 7 years, and that's because of the statutory regulations within the courts and 3 years. So if you stick to that 7 years, you're good. Sorry. And at the end of the day, if something comes up that was 8, 9, 10 years ago, it doesn't meet the requirements to even pass through the courts.
So your risk is, and look, ultimately, as more mediation moves online, even though you're in a specific jurisdiction, it may be that the party raises their case in a different jurisdiction. So it's probably just safest to be at the highest.
And just keep them forever.
No, we do a cull every time we move to try, because you can imagine with legal files. Not funny.
I've just had to increase my storage limit for my OneDrive because I'm just getting to the point where I'm at capacity.
Absolutely. So look, I'm mindful of the time. Does anyone have any other final questions or comments? I've just found this really helpful, Sam. It's been very good. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us. Any other questions or comments? Speak now, or
no? It's been great. It's been great, Sam. It's excellent, and I know you are on the other end of the phone. You're very happy to speak.
As I always say, if any of your mediators have any questions, I'm only a phone call away. I'm happy to answer any questions that they've got.
And look, that's always the best thing. The same thing, if you've got an ethical or other dilemma, you can always call us up at Mediation Institute and just run it. Don't wing it. Don't think, probably maybe this is okay. Just ask.
Silly question.
No. Put the recording up. We'll put contact details for Sam for anyone that does want to have a risk or a question that you'd like to ask privately. Thank you for coming along.
No, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent.
Thanks for organising, Joanne, and thanks, Sam. That was great.
Glad to.
Absolutely. Welcome. Okay, take care, everyone. We'll see you all soon.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.